Hi, this is Jeff White in Central Texas, lovely Fort Hood, in fact. And I apologize that my video is not as imaginative as yours is, Jessica. This is especially for you, though. I've watched several of your very witty sort of responses to debunk the whole idea of God or religion, and particularly interested in your thoughts on gullibility and science and proving things and logic and so forth. You may have a future ahead of you in higher education, not sure. But I want to offer you some other things to think about to add to what you already have. Okay, some religion is demonstrably false, and clearly so. Here's an example. The Mormon faith. Mormon faith is based on a book which has as its central character a guy named Lehi, I think. He's a Jewish guy, and he sails to the New World, and he's the father of all American Indians, according to the Book of Mormon. And Lehi has two descendants. One is dark-skinned and one is light-skinned, and they progress into two great races, and ultimately there's a huge conflict, and yep, you guessed it, the light and comely race defeats and destroys, no, I'm sorry, my bad, the light and comely race is defeated and destroyed, utterly wiped out by the dark and bad people, and 230,000 are killed in a day in a very, very large battle in New York. Well, actually the fact is that no person or event is corroborated by any archaeology or history or any other source, and there's specific science and DNA evidence to prove that no Native American is Jewish in origin, but that in fact they're all Northeast Asian in origin. And when you go to the little hilltop where the big battle happened, where almost 250,000 people died in a day from edged weapons in a giant Indian battle, there's no archaeological evidence of any sort which would tend to even begin to corroborate that. Now, the reason I mention Mormonism and how it's majorly debunkable is that I have lots of friends who are Mormon, and they're good people, but they're misled with regard to the Book of Mormon. It's simply false. Religion requires faith, and faith requires you to believe when there is no evidence to prove a thing. But faith does not require you to believe when there's a lot of evidence to disprove it. And no real faith could be at odds with any real science. And so my God, which is the author of all real science and the creator of everything that we see, certainly all material things that we know about, God created those things according to the Bible. That God is not disproven by any science. He in fact is the author not only of all the moral law contained in our Bible, but of also all the physical law. And interestingly enough, the reference to science is poignant because most of the founders and the beginners of all the major branches of modern science were people who believed the Bible. I'm firmly convicted that they never would have found order in the universe had they not expected order from their reading of the Bible. They knew God gave the moral law, and they expected God to give physical law. That's why the most influential work of mathematics of human history, Principia Mathematica, written by Isaac Newton, was written by a Bible believer and a man who thought that the Word of God was an incredibly powerful message to us from an almighty being who created us and owned us. And in fact, all the major branches and all the major innovations, really, of science are attributable to these people. There were a few minor and later innovations, I guess you would call them, that are relatively speaking. But even those who said they were atheists say interesting things. Stephen Hawking, that's the source for my conclusion that Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica is the most influential work of mathematics, by the way. I didn't just say that. Stephen Hawking, in A Brief History of Time, makes that declaration. And I think Stephen Hawking is a pretty smart theoretical physicist, don't you? Yeah. So Stephen Hawking says that when we have developed our single unified theory of everything, we will know the mind of God. How would he use terms like that? I don't know. Perhaps he knows more than he thinks he knows. Einstein said he wanted to know the mind of God, that all the rest were details, and that God doesn't play dice. But Einstein's a famous atheist to many people. I think you should be careful about what you decide based on very small and short quotes of historical figures, because I think those appeals to authority are no more logical than the unattributed source. And I think you should re-examine the Bible, because if its source is accurately reflected in the text, then its author is God himself. What more credible source could there be than God? Well, there couldn't be a more credible source. If you think you've read the Bible and you think you've gotten out of it everything that you can, I would ask you to read it again. Please start in the book of Luke. You'll find the earliest history of Jesus. And after you've finished Luke, read Matthew, Mark, and John to read about Jesus, who's a central figure of the entire text. Then when you read the rest of the Bible, look for Jesus in the text because he appears many times in many different forms throughout human history. He's the only causeless cause. He spoke everything into existence at the beginning when he created time, space, matter, energy, and information. No other cosmogony describes the beginnings of all those things so succinctly and so completely as do the first 10 words of the book of Genesis, chapter 1 and verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. I don't think you've given that a good enough chance, Jessica, and I think that you're a brilliant young mind, and you should think about it a little bit more. If it impressed Isaac Newton to the extent that it did, perhaps more study would be better for you.